The topic that we are going to talk about for the next 45 minutes at least is a topic that is given thought to and that is debated nearly everywhere in the world. How can we finance the green transformation and innovation? So how can the economy reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and what can banks, what can finance do to support that? My name is Lisa Nienhaus. I'm business and economics correspondent for die ZEIT, and I would like to welcome you all to this session, which is dedicated to one of the most important questions we have when talking about preventing climate change. At least I think so. In Germany, the topic of green transformation of our industry is high on the political agenda at the moment, as we have a new government with the Green Party as one of the coalition partners. Robert Habeck, the new German Minister for Economics and Climate and member of the Green Party, has already found a strong expression for his objective, for his goal in office. The German economic system is often called social market economy, or soziale Marktwirtschaft, as we say in Germany. And Habeck likes to say that this has to be changed to a social ecological market economy, sozial-ökologische Marktwirtschaft. And what does he mean by that? We need an economic and political system that supports green transformation of the economy. And later today, Robert Habeck will also be on the stage here at this event, but it's not only politicians that talk about green transformation, it's also the finance industry. For example, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, talks to other CEOs about creating a green economy. Is that only talk, or is it serious? How much greenwashing is going on, and where do we really see transformation? That is what we would like to talk about during this panel. But first of all, we will hear a short keynote by one of our guests to start into the topic. He is the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, short EIB. It is an institution situated somewhere between government and finance, as it is a bank owned by the EU member states. He has a lot of work experience in institutions that connect the economy and the government. He has worked for the IMF and World Bank, and he used to be head of the debt agency of the French Ministry of Finance. Welcome, Ambroise Fayolle.
Danke vielmals und Entschuldigung, auf Englisch zu sprechen, das ist für mich sehr einfach. Maybe let me start with one word about what EIB is exactly. We are the Bank of the European Union. So we are a public bank. Our shareholders are the member states of the European Union. We are created by the Treaty of Rome and like the European Commission or the Court of Justice, for example. And we are here to finance projects of European interest. And what has appeared actually over the recent years, and especially since in 2020, is the willingness of our shareholders to transform the European Investment Bank into the bank, the climate bank of the European Union. And for that, we have stressed a number of targets that are quantitative and qualitative and that are transforming the way we work, basically. So I'll just say a few words on them. What we have decided to adopt, and that was done unanimously, so it means all member states were behind these targets, is to increase significantly the share of the climate and environment projects that we finance from a minimum of 25% of our objectives to 50% by 2025. So it's a doubling. And together with that comes a qualitative nature, which is the willingness that our projects will, all our projects since the beginning of 2021 have to be Paris aligned. And actually we have gone one step behind in Glasgow. What we have announced in Glasgow is the fact that we want not only the projects to be Paris aligned, but we want also the counterparts to be Paris aligned. And that means that, for example, for high emitting companies in high emitting sectors, what they have to present is a decarbonization plan, of course, by 2050, but even more important by 2030, because 2050 is too far away. and that this plan is transparent and made public. And under these conditions, we can finance projects with, for example, steel companies that are looking at green projects for green steel or for green cement or for green chemistry. This kind of very, very interesting project that we see. And what we have also announced in Glasgow is another element of our strategy. That is, unfortunately, we did a lot with mitigation, but what we see is that climate change is already there. And unfortunately, in Germany and the Netherlands, we have seen that last summer with the terrible flooding that took place. And you can see that in the wildfires that are elsewhere in Europe and all these hurricanes that come every year instead of every 10 years before. And for that, you need to deal with adaptation, which is how to adapt our way of life to take into account the fact that climate change is there. And that's something that we do now in all our projects. And we have taken the commitment in Glasgow to triple our objectives in terms of adaptation. So clearly, the commitment of the EIB towards climate has become central to our organization. What does that mean? It means also two things in terms of our investment policy. It means that we need to do more for innovation. Because we know that half of the innovation, we know that if we don't have innovation, we will not reach the targets. We know that to have climate neutrality by 2050, basically, there are half of the innovation that we hope will come by 2030, but that are not yet to be commercialized these days. And we need to incentivize that as a public institution to try to, for early stage, very risky projects, that's where we can do some breakthrough projects that can be very helpful for the energy sector, for example. But also, what is very important is that the public sector, even if we have great ideas, even if our shareholders support us a lot, will not be enough without the private sector. And we need really a combination of action towards having as much as possible leverage so that our resources can ensure that private sector money will come to have maximum impact on climate projects. And that's what we have seen in many projects that have developed in, for example, in renewable energy or in big factories for batteries, for example, that we have done in Sweden. So that's what we are aiming at these days. We are trying really to have a big ambition in terms of investment policy, in terms of making sure that we try to develop promising technologies from the early stages right until they are ready for industrial use. And these kind of projects are really, really interesting and promising. And they're also very good for competitiveness of Europe, we think, and European firms, and good for European jobs. And let me finish by one word on two other elements. The first one is in terms of the investment capacity of companies. I mean, the lesson we have learned from the previous crisis more than 10 years ago is that if you don't support investment during the crisis, there is a big risk that you're going to lag behind after the crisis. This is what we learned during the financial crisis in the years 28 to 2012. And actually that has led to the need for the European Commission to put in place with us what we call the Investment Plan for Europe, or the Juncker Plan, that was trying to aim at increasing the level of risky investment. And we've tried to avoid this by coming much stronger, much earlier to support investment and to support companies that are ready to invest. And the last thing I wanted to say is a few words about what we do in Germany. Because Germany is a big country of operation, of course, for the Bank of the European Union. And we do there projects that are extremely interesting, I have to say. And let me just quote two of them. One, in 2019, we were approached by a company, a biotech company, that I had not heard of before. The teams were extremely excited about the treatment that they were proposing for cancer. That was using a technology that was called mRNA. I had no idea about what mRNA was at the time. Now I know much better. And the year after, the same company came to us and said, we think our technology works for COVID. And this company, of course, is BioNTech. Hmm. And we were able to very quickly support BioNTech with a 100 million euro loan to help the development of this new vaccine. And I think this is exactly where I think we can expect the Bank of the European Union to be supporting investment. And a second example in the more related to climate, that is something that we do with a railway company, a regional railway company called Niederbarnimer Eisenbahn. This operates from Berlin to small towns near the border to Poland. The very interesting thing is that they are developing new trains that will use the overhead contact lines of electrified sections in Berlin to charge the batteries and power the trains on non-electrified sections in Brandenburg. So these trains will be operated as of 2024, are therefore extremely energy efficient, do not generate air pollution. I mean, this is the kind of project that we love to finance. I'll stop there, thank you.
Thank you, Ambroise Fayolle. Now I'd like to introduce our two other guests on the panel. He has experienced a wide range of different banks. He worked for JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, BNP Paribas, Royal Bank of Scotland, and today he's the Chief Operating Officer of the bank ING Deutschland. Welcome, Joachim von Schorlemer. And our third person on the panel used to work for IBM and PricewaterhouseCoopers before he changed track and started working for an NGO. It's WWF, so the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And there he is today, the Director for Sustainable Finance. Welcome, Matthias Kopp. And after we've heard so much about what the EIB is doing, I would like to start with you, Mr. von Schorlemer, because we see that we now have a state-owned bank that does a lot of projects to finance the green economy. What is there for the ING? What are the projects that you can still finance? Where's the part that you can help greening the economy?
Thank you first of all for the invitation. I am very happy to be here as a panelist, and my dear joint panelists here are very rich experience in this field. And Monsieur Fayolle has already referred to it. It's the public and private sector which can and should work very closely together in many projects. Often we find situations where maybe kind of the kickoff needs some public money, while banks, let's not forget, we are still subject to all our regulations in Europe, in Germany and in Europe. So we have to follow the rules. Despite the fact that, interestingly enough, I think for now some years, society, institutions, politicians have understood well the transformation impact banks have and the financial industry, in fact, should have in this transformation process to a better climate world. So from that aspect, absolutely, most of these participants are very, very right so. So for an ING and for other banks as well, what have we done recently? I mean, obviously, let's, for example, take a look at, we started very early on in 2017, we started to actually invent the first ESG-linked loan for Philips. In 2019, we issued a Dürr AG in Germany, the first Schuldschein emission issuance in Germany, and so on. And since then, numerous frameworks we have, in fact, worked with on most, or almost, I think, 25% of the very large corporates in Germany and beyond. So from that aspect, we have a rich experience. And of course, what does it mean? We are not only looking at, and Monsieur Fayolle has referred to it as well, it's not only the project, it is the client. The client needs to demonstrate the path towards where he wants to be in a number of years, 2030, maybe kind of the goal, the ultimate goal, maybe 2050. If you take very large corporates like BASF, they have officially announced kind of their path to net zero emission in 2050. So it is still a long way. But I think we have to take into consideration, where have they started? Where are they now? It's nothing which can happen overnight. Yes, we do engage in projects, and we are extremely proud that as a bank, we can help supporting and financing these projects and actually support our clients. So from that aspect, we take very serious our position in this field.
But Mr. von Schorlemer, if I understand you correctly, you're now talking about the ING financing industry in the transformation. I think one main challenge in this is how to control that they really change. Usually banks only control other things. They do not control whether carbon dioxide emissions go down. Is that something that is changing in the finance industry now?
Oh, tremendously. There is not one single transaction of one single financing which goes through without passing our ESG committee. And in this ESG committee, we have people who really have in-depth knowledge of that field, and they actually look very closely what is the business model of the client, what are they doing. So it will be actually very interesting to now see the first round of publications of the 2021 annual reports, their first reports on their climate change. And these first reports, let's be very frank, they will give a good indication where we are heading to. It will not be perfect. We're still at the beginning of our, let's say, of our journey. But we will see very many interesting reports where we see a very straightforward and ambitious plan by many of the large corporates to demonstrate to their investors, to their kind of stakeholders, to their kind of employees, to society, what they are doing and that they are doing what society wants us to do. So there is a clear path, there's a clear regulation and regulatory framework in place which enables us and forces us to do so.
Okay, I see Mr. Kopp getting more and more nervous in the background. You've been listening to two professionals and their stories about green projects. Now, everybody seems to be very concerned about greening the economy at the moment. What do you think about the projects that we heard about? What do you think about the ambitions of the finance industry? Are they going to the right direction?
Thank you for the opportunity to also contribute in this discussion. And Elisa, to pick up your point, I think Ambroise was getting at it, to my mind, from exactly the right angle to say we expect companies that we finance to have a target, to have a path, to have a transition program, and to be able to demonstrate that. And also to demonstrate that's why I felt this very encouraging to say it's not only the project, but also the counterpart. So that is, I think, where things need to go. You asked, is the finance sector already there? That's for sure not the case. But if we look at the last, say, 2-3 years, mostly also driven by European legislation and dynamics, what we see in terms of dynamic in the system is very encouraging. Is it all done? No. Is it all implemented? No. Is it all standardized? No. Is it all practice and applied practice in bank institutions with credit lending processes, evaluations and investment processes? Of course not. Would be surprising if it was, because it's such a complex thing in such a short time period. But just in general to say, the way that we are starting to discuss it on this panel, and specifically in the sense of I'm expecting a path and I'm expecting to be demonstrated bank, lender, finance provider from the one who is using the capital to change. That I think is very encouraging. But that the example of the Niederbarnim train company is a good example, because that is a SME company, no reporting requirements, very little capacity. So but to some degree, I'd rather like to look at it from the glass is half full. If we find these examples, there's basically no excuse for anyone to not be able to engage with this. Yeah. So basically starting off in this discussion to say there's a lot of momentum there, but that's what we need, because what we are, final 2 points, what we do need at the moment is a transition of the entire system. It's not about, popping up another niche or channeling capital into segments in the market. Basically, the entire industry needs to be decarbonizing alongside a plan. The second thing I wanted to address is this: it's not about what society wants. To me, it's about what science requires. we only have a chance to stay below 1.5, 1.6, 1.7 degrees if these things fall into place, because it's basically the integral under the curve that we talk about. Yeah, it's not about an endpoint. Sometime we have achieved some level, but it's how we get there. And that needs to be the driving momentum in checking where capital is going.
Mr. Schorlemer talked also about the ESG criteria. And if I understood you correctly, we talked very shortly before this. You are quite critical of this. Can you explain why? And maybe can you also explain what are these criteria to the people that don't know them?
ESG is the abbreviation for environmental, social, and governance. So basically the way that the finance system has tried to label sustainability, which makes sense to dissect it into 3 areas. But to come to the point that we had early on in terms of being a bit critical about it, it doesn't provide necessarily any kind of performance assessment. It's saying here's an economic element, here's a social element, here's a governance element, and then it was left open to voluntary application of an ambition level, if you want, in the past. There were then ESG rating agencies, and it was an unregulated, unstandardized market. It was left open to everyone who wants to do something and then prove it with some kind of backing. Yeah, that's for sure not science-based, not at least not guaranteed, not necessarily so. That's why I'm fairly critical in the sense of ESG in the past could have been good, but there was no guarantee. If you were in the belief as a sort of general retail investor or a private person, and you go and invest into a fund that has a sustainability label on it, you wouldn't actually really need to go in and check and understand and go and see what the actual performance promise is if you want. Yeah, so if we do talk seriously about transitioning the economy, then that needs to be standardized because it is complex and because you can't expect from anyone to actually really, everyone becomes an expert in this. And the final comment, the second component, why I'm not totally enthusiastic about ESG, is there's this world that is supposed to be binary. There's the green stuff, and then there's the not green stuff. What we talk about basically is greening stuff, hence the gray bit, the 80% of the industry. There's only very little industries that we can screen out, that we can single out to say you have no capability of transitioning. Yeah, maybe if you're 100% mining coal, then your times are limited. But in basically a lot of any other sectors, you have a pathway in front of you. There's this approach of screening out things you don't want and then singling out the things you do want, and that's where you should be putting your capital to. The wind farms, the PV roofs, it's all good and great, but that's not doing the trick on transitioning entire economies. Yeah, it will be the chemicals that need to become decarbonized over time. It needs to be the cement that needs to become decarbonized over time. It needs to be machinery. It needs to be transport, buildings, and so on and so forth. And that's not a binary. I was bad yesterday and I'm good tomorrow. So the entire model that we had so far needs to again transition. But that's where we are hopefully getting to, because there's so much traction in it. And finally, if you look at what is happening in the financial system, there's so much net zero commitments out there now in basically every segment: asset management banks, asset owners, insurance companies. So I think it's becoming to be understood, and now it needs to be also operationalized. It needs to be spelled out how this actually works. Hence, it would be hard to say, yeah, it's done, or it's hard to say, no, it's all sort of window dressing and greenwashing.
Mr. von Schorlemer, we now heard already the word greenwashing. Can you understand the critique that we heard from Mr. Kopp about ESG?
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with him. There's always a tendency in the beginning for some people to sneak out or to find ways, around it. So certainly the measure most important is a clear taxonomy or clear standards. And hopefully not only European-wide standards, but global standards, which prevent participants, market participants, industry, and other participants from greenwashing. So yes, there is always a bit of danger if you leave too much leeway. But I think meanwhile, we see taxonomy. It's not perfect yet. It will continue to be developed further. We do report, corporates do report, and we will continue to learn. That's why I said earlier, it's a journey. And we, of course, hopefully learn very fast to get to the standards necessary to make sure there is no greenwashing possible.
We've heard the word taxonomy, and that is very important. That leads to a big debate that we heard during the last days and weeks. And the idea behind the EU taxonomy is that the state gives some guidance in what is considered green. Ambroise Fayolle, I would like to ask you, do you think that is a good idea?
Well, I think the principle of the taxonomy is extremely important. And that's exactly what Matthias and Joachim said. If you want to go in the direction of greening the economy, you need to speak the same language. And that's what the taxonomy is about. Speaking the same language, not saying, okay, my tie is green, even if it's not green. I say it's green, so this is a green, I'm greening myself. So you need to have some common standards, common statements, common language so that people agree on, and also it's very important for the investor community, that the investor community knows if I invest in such bonds, for example, well, then the standards will be clearly targeting green objectives. And so the taxonomy is something that is extremely, ambitious. It's also extremely new. It's not even completely finished because there's still work on it. But I think yes, for me, the objective is very relevant and remains very relevant. If we want to achieve the targets of the climate neutrality, we need that the companies, the financial sector, even the people in the street, they understand what we mean by, yes, this is green, yes, this is not green. And actually there is something in the middle that is probably more difficult to capture, which is what we call the do not significant harm. And that is something that is not necessarily considered to be green, but not necessarily hurting achieving the climate targets. And actually, if I can give you an example, sometimes, and it's often, you know, do you hit other targets that are important for climate and environment, especially environment, when you do climate projects? So if you are putting a wind farm in a place where there are rare biodiversity, birds that are very rare, etc. Danger is that, yes, you are going to put greening in terms of energy, but you are endangering the biodiversity. And that is certainly not good for reaching the climate targets either. So that's why it looks so complex, because it is complex, because it is interlinked.
But the discussion...
There is little alternative.
But the discussion we heard the last days was not about this biodiversity versus carbon dioxide emission reduction, but it was about nuclear power and gas. Nuclear power and gas are now considered green. How could that happen? And do you think it's the right decision?
Okay, well, let me say a few words, but if you have had Franz Timmermans, I'm pretty sure he is the best place to speak about that, because it's the European Commission who has basically made a proposal for the consideration of member states and the European Parliament. So what I would say are the following, from our perspective at the Bank of the European Union. One, this is something that has been proposed. It is now not yet being accepted. It is in the decisions by governments and the European Parliament to look at, do we go forward or not? And we are exactly at this stage. So it's a proposal that is not something that is in place. Second, for us, it does not necessarily change actually what is eligible for us. Because, for example, we can do gas projects, but we can do gas projects basically when they are actually combined with biogas or with storage or with hydrogen, or it has to be below 270 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which means very ambitious. And actually, the figure that, if I understand well, is in the proposal of the Commission. And for nuclear, well, nuclear is low carbon. It is something that in our energy lending policy is also something that is eligible. Now, is it something that we have the intention to develop? Actually, I have seen little gas projects in the recent year that we could finance. I've been at the vice president of the bank for the last 7 years. I've only seen 2 projects that we have done for nuclear. It was in Finland and in Slovakia for projects that were purely, security of nuclear installations. My view is, when you look at the need for renewable energy, the need for innovation, the need for energy efficiency, the need for financing adaptation, I mean, even if we have very ambitious targets, we will not have enough resources to finance that already. So what we intend to do is to concentrate on what is, we think, the most important in the next months ahead, which is to finance these kind of projects favoring renewable energy, energy efficiency, innovation, etc. And last comment that I have for us, you can have a policy, for example, that allows certain things to be financed, and that you do not apply them. For example, we could finance nuclear installations. We could. We don't do that actually. Yeah, this is very controversial at the bank. But what we have decided already for the last 15 years is that in any case, green bonds would exclude nuclear investments, even if they are considered green. We will not finance them in green bonds. So there are also choices that institutions can make.
I would also like to ask Mr. Schorlemer about these choices. Mr. Schorlemer, would the ING Deutschland invest into a nuclear power plant and call it green?
Already for some years, we stopped and made that official on our web pages. We don't finance nuclear, we don't finance new coal. So that is crystal clear for us. But again, the world is not always black and white. We don't want to engage in the discussion of what is better, what is less good, but it is not black and white. And therefore, if we have a green taxonomy, which is fantastic and which is what we should be aiming for, in the transition, we have also brown. Or let me give you the example leading to ING here. When we stop financing nuclear or coal, that is if we publish our green asset ratio, i.e. our loans, and of which part of those loans is, or lending exposure is green, then of course that is not a part of it. So we are reporting something which is worse than actually reality. So we have to also think about these sort of topics. And I think that's what I also referred to earlier on. It is a journey. We will be extremely cautious and interested in looking at the reports from banks, from ourselves, obviously, but also from banks, other banks and industry, how they start the reporting. But clear is the attention people take to it. Look, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was not that easy to engage in this discussion with C-level, with corporate at the top level of corporates. And then they started to open up. Supervisory boards were reluctant to engage in that topic. Now they all are over it. There is not one KPI, or there's not one board member around in Europe and globally probably who is not having clear KPIs, what to do, what to stop, and where to head for. So again, I think this is the taxonomy itself is a very great thing to have. Yes, we know we have to perfect it.
But doesn't that mean that the finance industry itself couldn't do it if the state has to do it?
No, I would not say so. Again, our example is maybe a good one. We started already 3 years ago to report on our wholesale banking lending exposure, what we call Terra, where we published already 3 years ago what part of it is falling to which bracket. So I think, and actually similar other banks did something similar as well. So it's right. It goes back to what basically Ambroise and Matthias said, having common standards and a common understanding of what we mean when we talk about this color or that color. that is what is key.
I would like to bring Mr. Kopp into the discussion as well, as I believe he has maybe a totally different view on this. I don't know. Mr. Kopp, what do you think? Is the taxonomy, is that something that will really work, or do we now see, considering the nuclear power and the gas problem, that a taxonomy will not work at all?
I think the taxonomy as such is, as Ambroise was saying, is a huge step forward, and also as Joachim was saying. So from that perspective, the taxonomy in itself. The second comment to make, also coming back to Ambroise's point, there's this do no significant harm principle. I think that is highly violated by this current delegated act. Hence, if this delegated act on nuclear and gas goes through, and exactly also as was said, this is now in the process. It's not a done deal yet. It's about to be decided. But if that goes through, in my understanding, the credibility of the mechanism of the taxonomy, that's significantly injured, if not destroyed. Because it says, I do check for harm. And if I have nuclear power and I have millions of years of lethal storage, if you want, etc., etc. If I look then at the science that was reporting against it, to me, that just can't go through. There's clearly a contribution because nuclear is lower carbon than other technologies, fine, but in the entire construction, shouldn't work. Same with nuclear, with natural gas. Natural gas just can't, because of all the lifetime emissions associated with it, qualify as being. The taxonomy does not prohibit or deny anyone to build any sort of technology if he or she would want to. I think this is the misunderstanding that the German government, for instance, sort of falls into when they push for gas being included. The stringency and the credibility of the instrument, I think that's what at risk if this CDA comes through. But that's now for discussion. If this CDA does not go through, then the taxonomy as such, as an instrument, with the spectrum it covers in the entire system, that's hugely needed. Because your comment earlier, Lisa, on is the finance industry not equipped to do this themselves? This is system-wide. It needs to encompass basically anyone. Hence, there needs to be some sort of a standardized regulatory framing for it, which I find the taxonomy is. Final comment. The taxonomy requires an amber category, if you want. So there needs to be a lot more addressing this transition component. Not only are you green or are you not, but how do you transition? That can still be healed. There's still stuff that can be done with the taxonomy. It's not lost, it's not useless, but you asked, is it applicable? Does it work? I think that component also should be way more prominent in it, rather than say you're in, you're out.
But what does it mean for the people that are maybe also watching now, that in the future want to invest their money into something green, and they are looking for ideas how to control that it is really green and not only greenwashing? What does this taxonomy mean? Do they have a possibility at all to control where their money goes?
Maybe if I can come first, because I need to run right on time. I think the Commission with this delegated act on nuclear and gas did itself a huge disservice exactly from that perspective. Because what now needs to be presented is, I'm invested here, I have an additional layer of information on, there is a share here, there is a component there, I have a ratio of, So basically from that perspective, in the sense of the retail client, the taxonomy as such is not helpful. It's making things more complex. Also for the product provider, if I'm providing an investment fund, and this is the initial idea behind it, capital market union, harmonization, standardization. Now, if you are providing a fund and you would want to sell it in France, then you can have nuclear in, that might be a plus, but you can't sell the same product in Austria, in Germany, in a lot of other countries. So there still is this need to differentiate on a country basis. You still have different standards, you still have different expectations applied. So from that perspective, I think the taxonomy isn't helpful. The taxonomy, final sentence, wasn't meant to be a label, but it was meant to be the bedrock, the underlying, the fundament for a European label. From that perspective, I think this is not helpful, because it still means you have to differentiate. A sustainable product in Europe, in Germany, is a different one. It can't be the same thing being sold in France, probably. So from that perspective, you look at me and I say, look, why did you do this? It doesn't. You're infringing one policy field, which is transparency and finance regulation, with a policy discussion on energy technologies. You shouldn't have done this as a commission.
Mr. von Schorlemer, are you of the same opinion? Is it dangerous for also maybe your clients, the people that want to invest into green things, that they in the end do not know if it's really green what they invest in?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with what Matthias said. We lack the amber, and we will see amber for numerous years going forward. To this specific topic, again, I think the reference to to BlackRock, Larry Fink's remarks are so important. This will be extremely investor-driven. So in the public domain, in public bonds, which are then actually bought by investment funds, these funds will be very cautious what they buy, knowing exactly that conflict they may enter into, which Matthias was referring to. So I would say my best guess is we now have a platform, a fundament in which banks still may finance nuclear and gas for, I think, obvious reasons if you look around Europe, and we don't have to repeat that discussion. But maybe kind of the public investors, so the non-bank scene, will maybe not invest and fund tremendously heavy these kind of assets. So we will probably end up with a split market in a number of years. That's my kind of hypothesis. So I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong. I will be looking at it very interestingly.
As Mr. Kopp has to leave us in 1 minute 40, I will try one last question to all of you, and he will be the first who gets to answer. Short answer. If we meet again in 5 years from now, how much will the EU have reduced its carbon dioxide emissions, and will finance be a big part of why this happens?
I think finance needs to be the key lever behind this, not the key implementer, but the key lever behind it, because if we take seriously this net zero commitment and that is applied, that then falls into place. By how much do we have reduced our emissions? Probably, ideally, in line with the pathways. So if we are to minus 55% by 2030, I guess something like minus 20%, because it's not a linear reduction, but that would be my hope.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Mr. Fayolle next.
Well, actually, I agree with Matthias. I think what is important is to me is two things. We have a very ambitious plan with Fit for 55 at the European level. What's very important is that we start soon. We start now, that we don't, because the earlier we start, the better for reaching the targets. And the finance momentum is there, so I have no worry on that. The road is clearly green, actually, in the financial sector, and you see a lot of initiatives. My biggest worry would be we need to make sure that the transition is just. If we leave countries, geographies, people behind, then there is a big risk that the whole scheme is going to fall apart.
Thank you. And Mr. von Schorlemer, what do you think? You also believe that we will follow the path?
Oh, certainly. And thanks to Matthias, despite the fact that he has left the call already, had to leave, he said banks are a key lever. And I couldn't agree more. Not because banks are so fantastic, but because banks play and have to play that important role of, taking money from investors and depositors into projects to corporates actually doing what we were discussing. Yes, and this is not only it's not necessarily just a moral imperative for banks. For banks, it also is the good business, the right business to do. It's, if you wish, it's the license to operate. It's very simple. I think if banks don't comply with what we are now aiming to do, they most likely will be out of business. So therefore, I cannot expect or cannot imagine banks seriously not following this route in a very serious fashion and supporting the economy to decarbonize further.
So this is a very optimistic end to this panel. I hope that you all are right. I'm not sure, but I hope. Thank you very much for being our guests, and thank you at the screens for watching our discussion.